Good afternoon. Well, we're at the end of the first week, and oh, what a week it's been. The president signed an executive order attempting to end birthright citizenship, and the judge says, "Oh, not so fast, young man." Quote, "I've been on the bench for over 4 decades," Kaufnauer, a Ronald Reagan appointee, said. Quote, "I can't remember another case where the question presented is as clear as this one. This is a blatantly unconstitutional order," end quote. Then on Monday, the president issued an executive order terminating, quote, "illegal DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility mandates, policies, programs, preferences, and activities in the federal government under whatever name they may appear." These are just 2 examples of the flurry of executive orders that flew out of the Oval Office this week. When Trump says, "Make America great again," is he trying to take the country backward or forward? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most of these events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historical context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, when Trump says, "Make America great again," is he taking the country backward or taking the country forward? For insight, let's turn to my first guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. He's one of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest book is entitled African Americans and a New History of the USA. Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, my dear brother, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
And you see, there y'all go again, writing these books about history, trying to set the record. We're going to have to ban the book, in the current regime. We can't have new history of the United States. Who do you think you are, Gerald Horne?
Well, I think it's important in terms of connecting the dots to realize that at this precise moment, we're going through a counter-revolutionary moment where, to answer your question, Mr. Trump and his cabal are seeking to take the United States back into the bad old days. However, it's important for all of us to recall that this is nothing new. W.E.B. Du Bois, some decades ago, wrote Black Reconstruction, which was about the counter-revolution of 1876, when the promise of Reconstruction was overthrown. You may recall that some years ago, I wrote a book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, which suggested that the slaveholders' rebellion, led by George Washington, was a revolt in no small measure against the growth of abolitionism in the mother country, speaking of London, not to mention the fact that London had grown tired of expending blood and treasure so that real estate speculators like George Washington could continue to seize the land of the indigenous. Likewise, you may recall that I wrote a book a couple of years ago, The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow and the Roots of U.S. Fascism, and I think that title speaks for itself. As we speak, I'm writing a book, my first book for 2026, indeed, The Counter-Revolution of 1893, the Hawaii coup and the roots of U.S. imperialism in the Asia Pacific. So you may detect a pattern here. If you know history, you will not be taken aback by this turn of events, speaking of not only what you've referenced, but Mr. Trump seeking to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accord which will make more likely the kinds of wildfires that are ravaging Southern California as we speak. He's seeking to withdraw the United States from the World Health Organization, which will make more likely the abomination that was the Trump administration reaction to COVID-19 during the dying days of his regime, Trump 1.0, as it's put. We also know that he is seeking to make sure that so-called drug cartels, particularly in Mexico, are adjudged to be terrorists so that he can revive the harebrained idea from Trump 1.0 to invade Mexico, which is one of the looniest ideas since Looney Tunes. But perhaps in that hall of horrors, that witch's brew of abominations, part of the worst, maybe the worst, are these pardons handed out to these miscreants who tried to overthrow the United States government to ensure Mr. Trump would continue to retain power on January 6, 2021. Because with that pardon, we now have the kernel of what we witnessed during the Reconstruction era. That is to say, an armed so-called non-state militia, which does the dirty work of a political party. In that case, in that instance, the armed wing of the Democratic Party in the Jim Crow South. And Mr. Trump has laid the groundwork for an armed wing of the MAGA movement, which we should take quite seriously. And then, as you've already articulated, probably the red meat to the 77 million strong Trump base is this overthrow or attempted overthrow of diversity, equity, and inclusion, complementing, I'm afraid to say, the Supreme Court decision from a year or two ago seeking to dislodge affirmative action. Fortunately, there's a split in the U.S. ruling elite. Meta, Facebook is tailing after Mr. Trump. Costco says that it will not. Microsoft says that it will not. We shall see. But in any case, focusing on the 77 million should also remind us of some of the misleading, misguided ideas of some of our friends on the left who portray the 77 million as misguided social democrats. But if they are misguided social democrats, I would have expected more than a peep, which we did not hear, not a mumbling word, when the incoming Treasury Secretary said that he's opposed to raising the minimum wage past $7.25. And in any case, if they're misguided social democrats, I would have expected many of these Trump supporters to have voted for Jill Stein or Cornel West or Claudia de la Cruz or other forces on the left. I mean, it's really sort of a cover-up that many of our friends on the left are engaged in. They're trying to throw dust in the eyes of the rest of us, trying to disarm us ideologically, just like they've been disarmed ideologically, which will make the course easier for these armed militias who no doubt, according to press reports, are in the process of seeking retribution. And I think it's indicative of the fact that forces on the left of the United States, supposedly their calling card is understanding the class question, but actually it's the class question that they perpetually and continually misread. I mean, for example, they do not deign to analyze why and how it is that despite all of the press coverage that the Black community was the demographic in most strident objection to the rise of the Trump regime, Trump 2.0, led by Black women voting against Mr. Trump 9-1. And as I've stated in a number of books, including the one that you so kindly introduced at the top, African Americans in the New History of the United States of America, that a central contradiction of the United States is that it's a settler colonial regime based upon class collaboration across class lines between and amongst European settlers. I go into that in some detail in the opening pages. However, the unpaid sector of the working class, speaking of the descendants of enslaved Africans, have been forced as a matter of surviving to engage in class struggle. Now, that basic fundamental lesson somehow has escaped the rapt attention of some of our friends on the left, which is one of the reasons why we're standing on the precipice of disaster staring down into a dark abyss?
A couple of things. One, I did a town hall with Professor Richard Wolff in New York last Saturday. And one of the points that first of all, Melissa W., thank you so much for that super sticker. Greatly, greatly appreciate it, because folks understand we're doing this for you, but we can't do this without you. So last Saturday, I was in New York with Richard Wolff, and I made, in part of my my opening, the point that I was making was there are times, there are epochs, there are events that occur that change history, and that most of the time, it's only upon reflection that you realize that when that event occurred, that was the moment. There are rarely times when you are in the moment and you realize this is the moment. And I call those Oppenheimer moments, going back to Dr. Oppenheimer when the gadget, the first bomb that was tested, was exploded, 18.6 kilotons of power. And he is reported to have said, quoting Hindu scripture, "I am become evil, the killer of worlds." He knew he was in the moment. And I say to people, you all right now, we're in the moment right now. Your thoughts, Dr. Horne?
Well, most certainly. And let us also, once again, take a stroll through history. That is to say, those seeking to understand November 2024 might be well to try to understand the fall of 1957 in Little Rock, Arkansas, when President Eisenhower had to send federal troops into Little Rock Central High School to prevent Black students from being mauled by settler descendants of the Euro-American working class and middle class. Of course, Mr. Eisenhower was forced to act because the United States was under unremitting pressure during the Cold War because of the stain on its escutcheon presented by U.S. apartheid Jim Crow. It was inconsistent with seeking to win hearts and minds in emerging Africa, emerging Caribbean. So he was forced to take that action. Or we might recall what happened at Ole Miss, University of Mississippi, 1962. Similar outrages attempting to prevent James Meredith and potentially other Black students from gaining education, to show that it was not sectional. In the following decade, in the 1970s, you had the Boston busing crisis, where many of the settler descendants from South Boston were seeking to tear Black students limb from limb because they were seeking to gain education. Now, of course, you might detect a pattern here. That is to say, objection to Black people gaining education in the first instance, which, of course, would allow them to compete, or allow us to compete more effectively in the marketplace. And certainly the import of the attempted overthrow of DEI is precisely to provide advantages to Euro-American men in particular, to allow them to be hired over better qualified folks who do not fit that particular demographic. But it's not only education. Recall that in the 1980s, that there was a mass uprising among settler descendants against the idea of having housing desegregation in Yonkers, New York, just north of the Bronx. Of course, the folks who were taken to the streets wanted to make sure that U.S. apartheid remained strong, which was incongruent with the idea of housing desegregation. And so I think it's way past time for us to recognize that we have a real problem in this country with regard to some seeking to cling to a discredited past. And I might also say that as for the Black community, a fateful turn was taken precisely during the 1950s, when some of the centrist and liberal leadership led by the NAACP decided to accept anti-Jim Crow concessions in return for throwing overboard the tallest trees in our forests, led by the late, great Paul Robeson, the multilingual internationalist, actor, singer, progressive, radical, etc. And that has left us ill-prepared, ill-disposed to confront the precise moment. I mean, there are folks in the Black community who consider themselves to be either intellectuals or leaders who not only have no idea of the larger global forces that are pushing the United States in the direction we're describing, they don't even realize that they're supposed to have knowledge of the larger forces, which means, in a sense, we're flying blind. And it reminds me when you read about these aircraft crashes off Catalina Island, off the coast of Los Angeles. You have these pilots taking off in the dark. They think they can figure it out, and they wind up in the ocean. That's where we might wind up, drowning in the ocean unless we get our act together. And to that end, let me also say this, that I think that what's happening with this present counter-revolution is a reflection of weakness of U.S. imperialism. It's a reflection of the fact that the United States is finding it ever more difficult to compete with the BRICS led by China, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, recently co-opted, of course, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Nigeria on the continent, including going east into Indonesia, United Arab Emirates, Iran, for example. And so what's happening is that with this challenge globally, you see that Mr. Trump is reduced to seeking to loot his erstwhile allies. As he told the folks in Davos, Switzerland, just the other day, you either invest in the United States or we're going to United States will slap tariffs on you for his recently devised External Revenue Service, which is going to challenge the Internal Revenue Service in terms of raking in revenue from the likes of Canada, Mexico, the European Union, Britain, perhaps even Japan, Republic of Korea, South Korea, Australia. And so this is a sign of weakness because Mr. Trump feels in his threats to the Panama Canal, his threats to Greenland, that the United States has to bulk up in order to confront the BRICS. However, what our leaders in the Black community apparently do not recognize is that he has opened doors. He has, in fact, provided us a roadmap as to how to respond. I was struck by the fact that 91-year-old Jean Chrétien, a former prime minister of Canada, responding to the crisis north of the border, instinctively, he said that Canada should seek allies in Denmark and in Panama. Of course, he didn't mention Cuba, which of course we would include because that's our staunchest and closest ally, speaking of Black Americans. But what Mr.
Chrétien, one of the newest members of BRICS.
Exactly. And what Mr. Chrétien acknowledged instinctively somehow has escaped the attention of many of our leaders. I said the other day in a broadcast that if we were not so desperate for troops and cadre, I would recommend that some of our leaders take the route of the Japanese elite when they face humiliation, pain, and embarrassment. They engage in harikari, ritualistic suicide. But sadly, I can't recommend that because we're too desperate for troops. So we'll have to just soldier on with these incompetents that are leading us.
Before we get to the DEI issue and the 14th Amendment, which I think is a clear example of just how utterly silly, unless I'm playing him cheap, and on this one I don't think I am. But you mentioned the World Health Organization, and I just want to make 2 points on that. One, people really need to understand the importance of the United States being in the WHO, because what a lot of people don't appreciate is the flu that you might get in January or the flu that you might get in February started in Beijing in May. It started in New Zealand in October. It started in Australia. These things make their way to us, and the way that the pharmaceutical companies are able to formulate their flu vaccines, for example, is by the flu that has started halfway around the world a year before. So you can't isolate yourself from the information thinking you are inoculating yourself from the potential virus. Is that fair to say, Dr. Horne?
Oh, for sure. And of course, obviously, you've opened the door for an analysis of the presumed incoming leader of the Health and Human Services Department.
Who, by the way, has no background in public health. He has no background in public health.
What's interesting, usually I use the Wall Street Journal to line my bird cages, but just the other day, they had an interesting analysis of RFK, who, of course, is a lawyer, as your comment suggests. And apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, and you must take this with a grain of salt, because you never know with their editorial pages, because they're a conscious and intentional spewer of misinformation and disinformation. But they suggested that Mr. Kennedy Jr., a lawyer, is basically trying to set up hustles for his trial lawyer friends, for example. As a matter of fact, he's refused to withdraw from a lawsuit he's involved in with regard to Merck, which is a major pharmaceutical corporation. And as you know, I mean, I know a lot of trial lawyers. Some of my best friends are trial lawyers, and many of them make a pretty penny by litigation and by suing corporations and transferring funds from these corporations to their pockets, and at times the pockets of their clients. But in any case, Mr. Kennedy, you mentioned vaccines, is, as the New York Times put it the other day, not a vaccine skeptic, he's a vaccine cynic, precisely because of his lack of information. Although, I must say, on the other side of the ledger, I'm heartened possibly to see that Mr. Kennedy's influence has caused the Tangerine Tyrant to suggest that all of the files concerning assassinations, not only of his father, RFK Sr., but also his uncle, JFK, and also Dr. King, should be released forthwith. I look forward to that, because
yes,
if they carry through with that, there might be some bombshell revelations in those pages.
Do you see that as being a shot across the bow by Donald Trump to that element of the elite that he views to be adversarial, that he's taken a shot at the FBI, he's taken a shot at the CIA, that because we all can pretty much figure that this was a multidisciplinary assassination crew, and that he has been hell-bent on demeaning, not that they needed any help doing it, but that he's hell-bent on undermining the validity of the Justice Department, undermining the validity of the intelligence state, and that this is one mechanism that at his disposal that he can employ.
Well, certainly we need to take advantage of the contradictions that are ensnaring the Trump team at the highest levels. I'm sure you follow the controversy about these HB1 visas that allow the tech bros of Silicon Valley to exploit shamelessly and mercilessly smart and intelligent labor from South Asia in particular. It's not coincidental that the CEOs of both Alphabet/Google and Microsoft are engineers from South Asian backgrounds, India more specifically. And you might have seen the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy, who also is of South Asian ancestry, got into a snit along with his comrade, erstwhile comrade, Elon Musk, got into a snit with Steve Bannon, the Trump hitman, concerning this. Steve Bannon said he was going to run Elon Musk out of the inner circle by inauguration day. Apparently that hasn't worked. But
that hasn't worked.
Stay tuned. And I think what that points up is that we really need to take advantage of the tensions and contradictions between and amongst the Trump base. So here's another example. I monitor Israeli media, so you don't have to, speaking to the audience. And there's a show by Caroline Glick, who has a thick U.S. accent, not unusual in Israel, where she is a resident. And on her show the other day, she was upbraiding the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, because according to Caroline Glick, the ADL has sided with the Trump team against the ultra-right in Israel concerning this recently negotiated pact with Hamas, which has fought Israel to a standstill since October 7, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, the ADL of B'nai B'rith, when Elon Mussolini, as he is now being called, I'm speaking of Elon Musk, the apartheid-era born billionaire, who at a rally recently gave the fascist salute a la Benito Mussolini, the founding father of fascism in Italy, of course, a comrade of Adolf Hitler. And the ADL, which seemingly specializes in attacks on Black intellectuals and leaders, presumably for their alleged supposed ostensible anti-Jewish fervor, they defended Elon Mussolini. Although he went too far the next day when he tried their tolerance and patience, when he made these juvenile jokes about Nazi leaders like Hess and Himmler and Goering. And then they chose to reprimand him. But once again, we need to take advantage of those tensions, because I'm afraid to say, comrades and friends, that for the next few years, we'll be playing defense. Mr. Trump and his cabal, they're playing offense. But sports fans could well advise you that if you have a strong defense, which I'm beginning to think that we have, you can turn that into offense in the blink of an eye.
I call that playing defense in an offensive context. In that we are, and when I say we, I'm talking about the supposed leadership of the opposition. We are being given opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to step forth and educate the electorate about, okay, folks, this is what you voted for. Now here's what you're getting. And the pardons, for example, I have interpreted Donald Trump pardoning these 1,500 insurrectionists as he sees them as his own militia, his personal militia, and that he's planning. He told them a while ago, stand by. And so they had been rounded up, they had been put in jail or put in prison, and he now has released them back onto the playing field. He sees them as his own army. Dr. Horne.
Well, sure. And I'm sure they read the newspapers like you do and like I do. And they may have seen the fact that Mr. Trump has withdrawn Secret Service protection from his former national security advisor, John Bolton, who supposedly had threats on his life from forces overseas. Ditto from former Secretary of State Michael Pompeo, which I was a little taken aback because I knew that John Bolton had written this tell-all memoir excoriating Mr. Trump. Actually, I happen to have read it. So I understand that attempt to strike back at Bolton. With regard to Pompeo, the only thing I recall is that he threatened to run for president in 2024. And he said that you need more than mean tweets in order to be a viable candidate. And I guess the ultra-sensitive, thin-skinned Mr. Trump took that as a rebuke and a reprimand. So Mr. Pompeo apparently has threats on his life. He no longer has Secret Service protection either, along with his top aide, Brian Hooks. And these are men who were formerly of the inner circle. One can imagine, as one goes down the pecking order, the threats and the acts that may be unleashed by the Trump private army against leading members of the Democratic Party, and of course, others who are not necessarily household names, for example. And I'm not going to mention any of those because I don't want to put any bad karma into the atmosphere. And so, once again, it illustrates this rather dark moment we face, and which brings me to a question I have for you that I've been trying to puzzle out, which is the Donald Trump and Melania Trump cryptocurrency.
Thank you.
Which brought billions on paper, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not a specialist on cryptocurrency.
Nor am I.
But I had thought that its existence, according to some of its tribunes, presents a danger to so-called fiat currency, like the US dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Trump presides over an empire that relies heavily on a fiat currency, the US dollar. He's threatened to sanction BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, if they move away from using the dollar and develop their own currency. But yet now he's developing an alternative currency. And I have to confess that the first thing that came to my mind was a movie, the movie Elysium with Matt Damon and Jodie Foster. It's a science fiction dystopia about how the rich and the wealthy, after they trash planet Earth, per Elon Musk, they fly off to another planet where they set themselves up. And I was thinking, whoa, okay. As I was in the midst of this nightmare, I was thinking Mr. Trump and his cabal flying off to Mars, as he indicated in his inauguration, and then using blockchain and cryptocurrency in order to finance this, leaving the rest of us serfs and peons and peasants to toil on this trashed planet. But of course, that was the substance of a dream or a nightmare that I had. But I told myself I can't wait to ask the eminent Dr. Wilmer Leon to give us insight.
Oh, me? Oh.
Into what's
maybe
going
you're
on.
talking about my dad in the picture behind me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, we know of all of his foibles and all of his issues and all of his problems. One of the things that Donald Trump is a mastermind, and that is marketing. He is the world in his mind is WWF, and he's the mastermind of marketing. And so now his family has launched this crypto business as he comes to the White House. And I want to say, isn't his Secretary of Treasury nominee? I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name, but he's the head of a bank that's been deeply, deeply involved in crypto as well. And so my question is not as much about Donald Trump and his personal investment in a crypto business. It's how he, as the president, is going to use the power of the United States government to create as favorable of a market for crypto as humanly possible. As there have been so many people, one of the things about crypto originally was it's beyond the reach of the United States government.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're finding now is you have more people with so many of these unregulated crypto companies springing up with zero regulation. There are more people now asking for the United States government to get involved and put some parameters around this thing. And so now Donald Trump has created a company in this field, and he is doing what he can to make it as profitable for himself as possible.
Well, I would say there's probably a split at the highest level of crypto circles, because recall that the outgoing secretary leader of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Gary Gensler, who has taught courses on crypto at MIT, he was trying to put guardrails around that industry, parameters, as you put it, but he became an ogre for a certain circle of the crypto cabal, which is one of the reasons why they spent a pretty penny to make sure that Donald J. Trump was elected. I should also say that in terms of the apartheid era figures, such as Elon Musk, for example, such as Peter Thiel, who helped to fund Trump 1.0 and was a godfather to Vice President J.D. Vance, who he helped to corrupt state. On the White House staff, as we speak, is another apartheid era curmudgeon, speaking of David Sachs. And his portfolio includes crypto. And in fact, crypto is highly popular amongst the European minority, at least certain of the European minority in post-apartheid South Africa, precisely because they're trying to do an end run around the ANC government and think that crypto and blockchain is the way to do so. But once again, it reminds me of what Stephen Miller has told us. Stephen Miller, of course, is the hitman for Mr. Trump, the rapidly balding, vertically challenged leader from Santa Monica, California. And he says that in the first week, which is what we're now discussing, of Trump 2.0, it's going to be the equivalent of a blitzkrieg. And excuse me once again for this invoking and evocation of Nazi era lingo, that they were going to be hitting us on all fronts, flooding the zone, as he put it, to the point where we would just be overwhelmed. And given what we've talked about in the last 35 minutes or so, it gives you an idea that he was onto something with regard to detailing this shock and awe that has been launched by Mr. Trump with this flurry of executive orders, with threats to imprison leading mayors if they do not cooperate with his deportation schemes, with the organization, probably, of a private militia at his beck and call. Once again, to reiterate, we're in the midst of a counter-revolutionary moment, the likes of which perhaps we have not seen since 1876.
And the guy that I was thinking of was not his nominee to be the head of the Treasury. It's the head of the Security Exchange Commission, Howard Lutnick, who heads an investment bank that is deeply involved with cryptocurrency, which many believe have been used by arms dealers and a whole bunch of other folks to scam or to steal money from people's accounts. And I think some of these scam operations are based in Vietnam. But there's, folks, you're going to have to stay tuned on this one, because it is still on the front end of and Carol, thank you so much for that super sticker. On the front end, you were just talking about some of the folks and the border issues and whatnot. One of the huge things, the president right now, I think, should be landing, if he hasn't already landed, in California, and he's there to survey the damages that have been that people have suffered and lost, the real damages that people have lost and continue to lose in these fires in California. And at the same time, they're trying to leverage that incredible loss with federal funding, federal relief aid being tied to supporting spending bills. And one of the things, and so much so, it's raising the ire of some Republicans in California. And I've been on shows saying that, there is, of course, this stereotype of California being incredibly liberal, everybody walking around wearing Birkenstocks with long hair, smoking dope, and listening to Sly and the Family Stone. But when you get to Southern California, when you get to Orange County, that's the birthplace of the John Birch Society, Ronald Reagan, and Gil Scott-Heron told us in Watergate Blues, and the rich go to San Clemente. So he, in trying to leverage California and the pain and suffering and historic loss of people in California, he's trying to leverage that for political gain.
Well, let me seize this opportunity to mention that what you just referenced with regard to the Southland is the subject of a recent book of mine, Armed Struggle, Panthers and Communists, Black Nationalists and Liberals in Southern California through the 60s and 70s. As you know, we'll be at Sankofa Bookstore across the street from Howard University on February 1st, 2025, 6 to 8 p.m., Washington, D.C. Be there or be square. I'd like to see your face in the place.
In the place.
I'd like to see you style down the aisle, double file. But in any case, the right-wing tendencies that you sketch with regard to the Southland is nothing new. I mean, I wrote an entire book about it. That not only the John Birch Society, but the fact that the brothers and sisters felt driven to pick up guns in order to fight back against the notorious LAPD, against the FBI and the other leaders of these nefarious police groupings, the LA Sheriff's Office, which is notorious, I'm afraid to say. And it's quite ominous that one of the first trips of Mr. Trump is to the Southland, because as we speak, we're expecting a good deal of the resistance to Trumpism to come from the Golden State, to come at least from those, or many of those, who are backing Attorney General Bonta, Governor Newsom. I was struck by the implied, if not real, threats to Mayor Bass that she could face the wrath of the Justice Department unless she cooperates with this mass deportation scheme. Given the fact that her popularity and her polling numbers have dropped in light of perceptions about how she responded to the wildfires, she has to take that quite seriously. And so once again, we're faced with a real crisis. And the question is, are our organizations and our leaders up to the task? So
now this whole idea with the 14th Amendment, and folks, it's very, very simple. The first sentence in Section 1 reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That's called birthright citizenship. If you are born on American soil, you are, by the fact of birth, an American citizen. It's pretty clear to me. So the president signs an executive order attempting to end birthright citizenship, to which the judge says, I can't remember another case where the question presented is as clear as this one. This is a blatantly unconstitutional order. It's unconstitutional on a couple of aspects. One, well, primarily, if we understand separation of powers and checks and balances, the president cannot issue an order changing the Constitution. That can only be done through the Congress and through a constitutional convention. So I have to ask you, Dr. Horne, what do you see as being the method? And thank you, My Life Totally, for that $10 super sticker. What is the method to this madness? Is he that crazy, or is he crazy like a fox?
Well, I think it may be a little bit of both. What I mean by that is, of course, he was rejected at the district court level, but obviously the plan is to appeal and to get it to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the conservatives have a stranglehold, where a number of the appointees are sitting at that level precisely because they were appointed by Mr. Trump himself. And so even though I agree with the analysis of the district court judge and your interpretation of his analysis, this game is far from over. And it's quite ominous that the Trump team refers to this withdrawal of birthright citizenship, or weakening it or obliterating it, as the Kamala Harris proviso. Because recall that his opponent was born in the United States, one parent being from Jamaica, another from India. Under interpretation of Mr. Trump's reading of birthright citizenship, that would mean that she could not be adjudged to be a U.S. national. And I think the second case, because of course lawyers not only have to look at the case before us, which is the case now proceeding presumably from the district court level to the high court, you have to think of the next case. And the next case, inevitably, it seems to me, will be applying a Trump victory at the Supreme Court level retroactively. That is to say, right now, they're saying that past February 2025, birthright citizenship no longer obtains. The next case will deal with perhaps Kamala Harris and saying that this ruling can be applied to you and make her stateless fundamentally, or make her return to India or Jamaica, for example. These are the perilous waters that we're in right now. And part of the danger is that what I've just sketched out hypothetically cannot be ruled out altogether unless you're terribly naive.
And I have thought along the same lines, and I'm glad you explained it that way, because I see the method to the madness as being Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their representative numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. So if he is able to get that birthright citizenship issue to the Supreme Court and they err on his side, now we're talking about reapportionment in terms of looking at the number of individuals that are eligible to be counted as we determine who our congressional and senatorial representatives are. There's a whole game that can be played here once you pull that thread on the sweater of birthright citizenship. And this is also why African Americans should be very, 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 very concerned about this, because the 13th Amendment abolished enslavement. The 14th Amendment made those newly freed enslaved Africans Americans. Am I drinking too early in the day?
Oh, I don't think so. And I should also add a footnote to what you just said, which is that it's well known that the conservatives, the ultra-right, are closer than some of us realize to convening a constitutional convention, whereby they rewrite the founding document. Now, those of us who are familiar with this process recall that in the late 18th century, when the United States was operating under the Articles of Confederation, when the so-called framers and founding fathers met in Philadelphia, they went past their remit in terms of tweaking the Articles of Confederation. They wrote an entirely new document altogether. And in terms of potential horrors, I can think of nothing more dangerous than a runaway constitutional convention that could overturn the 14th Amendment, overturn the 15th Amendment, overturn the 13th Amendment. Recall, as my work has detailed at some length, that there has been a long-standing ambition in the United States of America to oust the Black population altogether. Mm-hmm. Recall, as I've written about in my book on Haiti and the Dominican Republic, that under President U.S. Grant in the early 1870s, that diabolical process of sending us all to the DR, to the Dominican Republic, barely failed. I've argued that you understand the rise of the movement led by Marcus Garvey, and of course we know that Mr. Biden walking out the door tried to clear, in part, the record of Mr. Garvey, but his supporters say that he didn't go far enough. They want total exoneration. But one interpretation of the Garvey movement is that a number of Black people in the United States decided, you know what, we'd rather jump than be pushed. That is to say, that we'd rather work out a scheme to depart the United States on our own terms, rather than be expelled willy-nilly. And of course, going back to my book that'll be published in the fall, I'm speaking of the book, The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. After the War of 1812, when there was this perception that the free Negro population of Baltimore then was in many ways the capital of Black America, since it had the largest free Negro population, there was the perception that they had participated in the British invasion of Washington, D.C., which led to the torching of the White House and sending President Madison and his girlless spouse Dolly fleeing into the streets one step ahead of the posse. So that's where the idea of Liberia came from. That is to say, we got to get rid of these free Negroes and send them across the Atlantic. And then after that Nat Turner Revolt, 1831, the idea was we need to get rid of some of these enslaved along with them. And that's the roots, that's the origins of Liberia, which is now represented in the United Nations. So it's important to bring out this history because those who do not understand the past are condemned to repeat it. And I'm afraid to say that the way things are stacking up as we speak, some of us are condemned to repeat the horrors of the past.
And 2 days after President Trump signed the executive order regarding 14th Amendment, arrests, we had this raft of executive orders cracking down on immigration, arrests by ICE, but the arrests by ICE appear to be along the same lines as routine operations. And what Donald Trump promised on day one in terms of this massive arrest of illegal immigrants hasn't really taken place. A couple of things here. I'm gonna ask the audience a couple of things. One, we've got about 252 of y'all up there. If you could hit that like button, we'd greatly appreciate that. Please hit the like button. That's one thing. But now back to the immigration issue. One, nobody's really talking about how much this attack on immigrants is going to cost. From what I understand, ICE right now is like $230 million already in the hole. They're going to have to hire more agents. When you hire more agents and you arrest more people, that means on the administrative side of the process, you need people to process all of this. You need judges to process all of this. The private sector companies that right now are housing people are going to have to expand their facilities. There's been very little discussion about how much this action, and I haven't even gotten to the economic impact that rounding up all these people is going to have on agriculture and all other types of processes, that these jobs that these immigrants do. Nobody's really talking about that math and how much this is going to cost. Folks, please hit that like button for me. Go ahead, Dr. Horne.
Well, the costs are going to be through the roof, as preliminary estimates show. And with regard to the prison industrial complex, particularly the private prison sector, their stocks are going through the roof. I know that this show does not specialize in stock tips, particularly those with regard to investing in the prison industrial complex, but it's quite remarkable. It's stunning and staggering, in fact, how though their stock prices are being bid up. And once again, we talked at least inferentially about certain Black Americans who have discussed how the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship, that's not necessarily our fight, since it's supposedly only designed to uproot those with roots outside of the North American mainland. But of course, we've tried to dismiss that particular idea. With regard to the private prison system, well, obviously, once those migrants, undocumented migrants, are deported, there'll be a lot of empty beds, and there'll be an impulse to fill those beds, just like in the state of California. Part of the reason why California has been in the forefront of imprisonment, particularly imprisoning young Black men, is because you have a prison guards union which clamors for beds to be filled so that they will have more union members paying dues into the treasury so that the leaders of the union can live large.
Not only that, but in some of the contracts that these private sector companies have with state governments and with federal governments, there are minimum bed requirements written into their contracts. And if that minimum bed requirement isn't met, the state still has to pay the company, even though the people aren't sleeping in the bed.
Well,
there are guarantees. There are minimum guarantees written into a lot of these contracts so that the private company knows they can recoup their investment, whether that bed is filled or not.
Well, that reminds me of contracts that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin have with the Pentagon, so-called cost plus contracts, where it gives them an incentive to come in with a low bid, but exit with twice the amount of that low bid, for example. It's sort of baked into the system.
Cost plus fixed fee. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I know that we may be coming across as prophets of doom and gloom, but I'm afraid to say that given the past week in Washington, D.C., that an appropriate response and reaction is to sound the alarm about descending gloom and doom, because it's already beginning to bite. And if we're not careful, the worst is yet to come.
I know you promised me the time you have, and I know your schedule is very tight. Can you give us any more time, or do you have to go?
Well, I have another interview, believe it or not, coming up at the top of the hour.
Okay. Well, then with that being said, Dr. Gerald Horne, I greatly appreciate your time. You fit us in. And I can say, folks, those of you that are interested, Dr. Horne will be gracing us with his presence on my show tomorrow on Sirius XM. Those of you that have Sirius XM will be continuing this conversation from 12 to 1 Eastern tomorrow on my Sirius XM show.
And of course, at Sankofa Bookstore across
February
the street.
1st. From 6 to 8 p.m. Washington, D.C. We got to see your face in the place. Be there or be square.
There you go.
Dr. Gerald Horne, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate it. Folks, there are a couple other things that I wanted to get to on this issue. The president directing the Office of Personnel Management to put all employees of DEIA offices on paid administrative leave no later than 5 p.m. this past Wednesday is really why I asked the question at the top. Is the president, with his mantra of "Make America Great Again," is he trying to take us back to the great old days of segregation? Or does he think somehow he's moving the country forward? Because who is against diversity? Why would you be against equity? What is it about inclusion that gives people so much heartburn? Because he also revoked a landmark executive order signed by President Lyndon Johnson that prevented discrimination in government employment, and with the intention of advancing racial equality. Again, these are the kinds of questions that have me asking, is Donald Trump trying to take us backwards? Lyndon Johnson issued Executive Order 11246, which directed federal contractors to take affirmative action to end discrimination at their firms and gave the Labor Department enforcement authority over violations found by the EEOC. Now, one of the things that's important here to remember is affirmative action was actually the brainchild of an African-American Republican in Philadelphia. And unfortunately, at the moment, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but it was called the Philadelphia Plan. And it was presented to Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon endorsed it because Richard Nixon saw this as a way of promoting Black capitalism. And Richard Nixon thought that if he could encourage Black capitalism, that would increase the roles of African Americans in the Republican Party. It wasn't Leon Higginbotham. Leon Higginbotham was a judge that was not, Leon Higginbotham did not correct the Philadelphia Plan. In fact, I have a book by him. Where'd it go? Okay, anyway. I'm drawing a blank on the brother's name, but no, it wasn't Leon Higginbotham. Anyway, who has it? When I use the NFL as a perfect example of how DEI works, how well it works. It was called the Rooney Rule in the NFL, where because there was such a huge number of African-American players, but at the time, very few, if any, African-American coaches, let alone head coaches, it became a rule that an African-American had to be interviewed. It didn't say had to be hired, just had to be part of the interview pool. You had to at least talk to a brother. If you had a head coach, an open head coach position, you had to at least bring a Black individual into the room and have a conversation. If you then chose not to hire him, then fine, you didn't hire him. But you at least had to have a conversation. And as a result of that, what we see all these years later are a number of African-American head coaches in the NFL. And so these DEI, and when you look at the affirmative action plans, which were initially put in place during the Johnson administration, many of them had mandatory minimum numbers, percentages. And of course, we had the Bakke case in California, and in terms of entering graduate school or medical schools, and so then they watered down the requirement, and then they wound up making it a goal or an objective. But even with that, and get back with me, but the players cannot take a knee. Oh, I got you on that. You're absolutely right. That's a whole nother conversation, but you're absolutely right. Because I was, now to interrupt myself, I was saying during the Kaepernick issue that as soon as they went at Colin Kaepernick, I was saying every Black player in the NFL the next Sunday should have taken a knee. Okay, Jerry Jones, you're going to say that you're going to suspend or fire a player that engages in that protest? Well, every player on the team, particularly every Black player on the team, should have taken a knee. And now what you gonna do? See, one of the big things that the system is afraid of is collective thought. That's one of the biggest things that they believe, and they function in the context and concepts of divide and conquer. And so they make it very easy for certain players to be very comfortable. And so the players are going to side on the side of management as opposed to siding with the players. And Talia Cooks, you're still boycotting. So am I. So am I. I'm not buying a ticket to an NFL game. Colin Kaepernick is still out of football. In fact, there was some talk early this season that he was going to be the quarterback's coach with the San Diego Chargers. That he was going to, I think, reunite with what's his name that coached Michigan? Harbaugh. That Harbaugh was going to bring him in as the quarterback's coach. And I don't think that ever, well, I know he's not on the staff of the San Diego Chargers. I don't even think Harbaugh was even able to get him into the door of the facility. But anyway, J.M. McClinton, Kaepernick is still not back in the NFL. This is telling about American politics. I believe it's very telling about American politics because it shows how weak we are. See, one of the things that I've been saying for a very long time is that we have to stop being fans of these teams and start being consumers. Stop being fans, because fan is an abbreviation of fanatic. And we know that fanatics don't think very clearly. But if you stop I'm not saying stop being a fan. I'm saying stop viewing this as a fan. Because if you started viewing this as a consumer, and it was your local grocery store, or it was your local restaurant, or it was your local beauty supply shop that treated you as a customer, the same way many of these owners of these teams are treating their players of color, you would be viewing this very differently. You would be viewing this very differently. So when Colin Kaepernick became the target of ownership, why didn't every black fan show up to the next game with a Colin Kaepernick jersey on? Or why didn't all of the black fans not show up? Or why didn't all the black players take a knee? Why didn't all the NBA players take a knee? Why didn't all the NBA players show up on the court with a Colin Kaepernick jersey on? There are so many ways, so many simple ways, so many nonviolent ways that we could have made a very clear statement as a people about that issue that would have resonated beyond the NFL, beyond sports in general. A whole lot of folks would have sat back. A whole lot of folks in positions of power would have sat back and said, oh my God, we got a problem now. These Negroes is thinking in a like mind. Because remember, Gil Scott-Heron told us, not that the revolution won't be televised. What he told us was, even though he did tell us that, what he told us was the action that you see in the street is not the revolution. The revolution starts when you change your mind. The revolution starts when you change the way you look at things. Because it's that change of mindset that leads to substantive, long-term action, not just knee-jerk response. I'm going to go out in the street and I'm going to throw a brick, or I'm going to go out in the street and I'm going to turn a car over. No, that's not what brings about long-term substantive change. It comes when you change the way you look at things. And then you start to recite what that brilliant African-American philosopher Whitney Houston said: hell to the no, Bobby, hell to the no. We ain't doing that. So I'm glad you brought up the point of Colin Kaepernick, because that to me is a very clear example of, see, and a number of y'all here are putting this on the athlete. Dwight, athletes are worried. Athletes, where to go? Oh, athletes are warriors and entertainers. Keep it real. Money makes people reevaluate their actions. But I know I mentioned the athletes, but there are a whole lot more fans than there are athletes. Ernest, if football players today, Dr. Wilmer, will rather wear a dress than take a knee. That's okay, but that's not who I'm talking. That's not. There are more fans than there are athletes. Count the number of players on each side of the field. Count the number of NFL, NBA players on each bench, and then look at how many people are sitting in the arena. Look at how many people are sitting in the stadium. Look at how many people are watching these games on television. There are a whole lot more of us, non-players, than there are players. So for as much as I would have loved to have seen the players lock arms, take a knee, flip the finger, and tell Jerry Jones to go pound sand, as much as I would have loved to have seen that, I bet you dollars to donuts that the players would have taken the cue from the fan base. So go to the arena and tailgate. Go to the stadium and tailgate. Just don't go into the game. What about that? But see, there's not a collective mindset. And a lot of people allowed, and I put that in past tense, and still allow themselves to be swayed by the dominant narrative of mainstream media. So Colin Kaepernick was portrayed as a villain. He was portrayed as being anti-American, when in fact he was standing up for the American people by taking a knee. But a whole lot of folks listened to all that chirping on sports talk radio and on MSNBC and on CNN. They listened to all that chirping and got scared. Got scared. So, yes, it was Arthur Fletcher. Arthur Fletcher, thank you, was the creator of affirmative action. Arthur Fletcher was an African American Republican in 1970, that came up with what was called the Philadelphia Plan. And the idea was there was a lot of federal money that was going into Philadelphia to, I think, build highways and other types of infrastructure projects. And Fletcher said, if there's this much federal money coming in, why are all the contractors that are getting these contracts, why are all of them white? He said there needs to be a way to help develop African American contractors. So they need to set aside a certain percentage of these contracts for African American businesses. And he then, as a Republican, got the ear of Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon bought in to the affirmative action program. It was contrary to popular belief, folks, it was a Republican idea. Now it's being painted as this incredibly racist and onerous and illegal and all these other adjectives. It was a Republican program. And that gives credence to the statement, even though it wasn't Ronald Reagan that did it. Remember, I said, and people have said this for years, that the Democratic Party has moved so far to the right, and that American politics has moved so far to the right, that today, if Ronald Reagan were alive today, he would be considered a conservative Democrat, not a Republican. So you have Donald Trump castigating a program that was started in the 70s by Republicans. He's demonizing the judge that just heard his foolish case. The judge was a Reagan appointee. The judge was a Reagan appointee. Hence the judge's point, I've been on the bench 40 years. I think that's what he said. Let me see if I can find it. He said, I've been on the bench 40 years. And I can't remember, 4 decades. I've been on the bench for over 4 decades. That means he was a Ronald Reagan appointee. I can't remember another case where the question presented is as clear as this one. This is a blatantly unconstitutional order. And now what does Donald Trump do? Donald Trump attacks the judge, and the judge is a Republican. I'll assume he's a Republican because he was a Reagan appointee. I've never met the judge and never been to the polls with the judge, but I will assume that judge as a Reagan appointee. And if my assumption is mistaken, then I will take the hit for that. So that's why I say again, there's still all of this back and forth about the athletes, but so folks, how do you feel about the immigration policies and the executive actions Trump signed on his first day? What impact do you think that this will have on you and your family and your community? Do you think that they're beneficial, or do you see them as incredibly, potentially harmful? And while you all are responding to that, another interesting thing, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was sworn in on Tuesday, has said the Ukraine war needs to end. It's a stalemate, he said. Well, no, that's just stupid. It's not a stalemate. Ukraine lost. They got the hind parts whooped a year and a half ago. Just because the fighting hasn't stopped, it doesn't mean it's a stalemate. It means that the United States continues to send money, human lives, and weapons into the fray and won't accept defeat. He says it has to end. It's a stalemate. and that the Trump administration is going to work to bring it to a close. Well, the issue there is how now, brown cow, how now does the United States bring this fiasco to a close and not accept defeat? See, because if they're talking about a negotiated settlement, if they're talking about a peace agreement, no, you better be I'm not saying that's not going to happen, but it's much more probable you're going to have to talk about surrender. As I've said in jest, you're going to have to fire up the USS Missouri, resurrect Emperor Hirohito, and get homeboy in the Black Sea, come on the ship and surrender like Japan did at the end of World War II. Because the territory that has been taken through an act of war that was provoked by the United States. You can't start a fight, get your hind parts whooped in the fight, and then try to negotiate with the guy that just kicked your butt. No, it doesn't work like that. Especially when you've done this before. Especially when you started a fight with the same guy a couple of years before. He kicked your butt. You said, okay. Let's stop this and let's sit down and work this out. He says, all right. You sit down and you work it out. And then you don't uphold your part of the deal. You don't uphold your part of the deal. And so then you go back and now you try to start the fight again. And the guy keeps saying, hey, hold up. I thought we negotiated this. I thought we came to an agreement. I thought we had reached an understanding. And you're just like, oh man, the hell with you. We lied. And now he commenced to kicking hind parts again. And now you want to cry foul again. And now you want to sit down and negotiate again. And he's saying this time, he says, no, I'm not falling for the, as Eddie Murphy said in get the movie, I ain't falling for the banana in the tailpipe trick again. Not going to do it. Now you're going to surrender. Now I'm going to keep what I've taken. My conditions are still the same. You will not be a part of NATO. You will not put missiles on my border. You will get these Nazis out of town. And no, you're not going to see. Here's another part of the fallacy. They keep saying, well, Marco Rubio is saying, well, now one of the things that's going to have to happen is NATO troops are going to have to be sent into Ukraine as peacekeepers. What that says to me, little Marco, is you still don't get it. Well, no, you know what? You really do get it. You just can't bring yourself to admit that you were wrong. And that your wrongness, yes, I just made up a word. You can't admit, you can't concede that your wrongness prompted the death of how many hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine. You have lost an entire generation of males in Ukraine. What was once the breadbasket of Europe is decimated. And it's your fault. You started the fight and got your hind parts whooped. And now you want to talk about, well, we're going to have to find a peaceful solution. The way you find the peaceful solution, and no, I'm not going to take the same tact I did before. No, I'm not going to do that again. I do not want to insult anyone. Just stop messing with them. Admit you got whooped. Get out of Ukraine the same way you got out of Afghanistan. You fought in Afghanistan for 22 years. After 22 years, and I don't know how many billions and hundreds of billions of dollars wasted, and how many people killed, and how much stuff blown up, you had to pack up with your tail between your legs and get out of Dodge. Well, do that now in Ukraine. Do that now and you just get the hell out of town by sundown. That's all you got to do. So, where are we here? Was it only the can and will make these changes for us as a people? I'm not sure, Patrick. I'm not sure what that means. Only the, I don't know what that means. Trump is a clown and he will push Agenda 2030. Okay. Horrible master. Okay. So what's the point? Trump is a clown. We know that. That I don't debate that with you in the least. And we know he's going to push his agenda. We know that. So what are we going to do? That's the question. The question is not about he's a clown. We know that. It's not about his agenda. We know that. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? The analogy is I'm standing in my driveway and I see somebody walking down the street towards my house. I know who they are. I know they come to mean me harm. So do I turn to my neighbor and say, hey, there's so-and-so, you know, he's a gangster. You know, he's come down here to mess with us. And my neighbor says, yeah, I know that. And he keeps getting closer and closer. So at some point, one of the two of us, if not the both of us, have to say, so now what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do? How are we going to prevent what we see coming down the street? How are we going to prevent that doom from falling upon our homes? I think we better handle this business, however that business has to be handled. So that's the question. What are we going to do? Ernest, as long as we keep missing the moment, the revolution will continue to be on hold. You are absolutely right, Ernest. You are absolutely right. As long as we keep missing the moment. And I'm telling y'all right now, you are in the moment. The moment is now. The moment is here. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to sit back and listen to Hakeem Jeffries sing that same old soap song as though he doesn't realize he got whooped, as though he doesn't realize it is to our detriment to continue to try to? When are they going to stand up and say no? When are they going to stand up, they being the members of the CBC? When are they going to come on American television as a group, hold a press conference, come on C-SPAN and say, time out, folks. The game is over. What this dude wants to do, we cannot tolerate. What this dude wants to do, we cannot stand for. We have to come together, and if we don't have the votes to stop it, we at least need to call this to your attention so that you as the American people can do what you need to do. Can't play with them anymore because they don't play fair. Can't play with them anymore because you can't trust them. Hakeem Jeffries and Mike Johnson back in December, in order to get the continuing resolution through, they shook hands. They came to an agreement on a Monday. And then Wednesday, when Donald Trump and Elon Musk get a hold of the plan, they scuttle the whole damn deal. And then, in order to get the whole thing done, Mike Johnson agrees with the fiscal hawks in his camp. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to sign this deal now, this continuing resolution. We're going to sign it now so that the government can continue to function. And then we'll deal with cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare, cutting Medicaid, cutting food stamps, cutting veterans benefits. We'll deal with all of that stuff in March. Beverly Hills Cop. Thank you, Sun Yoon. That was the reference to the movie and the banana in the tailpipe. Thank you, Zhu Yun. Where was I? Oh, why didn't, when that deal got done, why didn't Hakeem Jeffries and the entire Congressional Black Caucus go on C-SPAN and say, folks, we got the continuing resolution done, but now you're about to get done, because here's what they want to do. And we won't stand for it. We will not stand idly by. Hey, what did James Brown say? I'd rather die on my feet than keep living on my knees. Great African-American philosopher James Brown said, I'd rather die on my feet than keep living on my knees. When are they going to get up off their knees? Only when all of y'all decide that A, you're going to press the like button for this show, and you're going to take action. What? Man, that's a stupid question. So get back with me. Rubio is a delusional sycophant. Absolutely right. But no, you're absolutely right. Get back with me. You're absolutely right. Marco Rubio is a delusional Trump sycophant. Absolutely right. But I will say this. Of all the people that Donald Trump has nominated, I can think off the top of my head, I can think of two people. Kim Bondi, she's a delusional sycophant as well. She was the Attorney General in Florida. She's no dumb woman. I don't agree with her politics in any way, shape, or form. She is a Trump sycophant. But I don't think she's unqualified to be the Attorney General. I think she's a bad selection. I think she's a horrible selection. And I think the results of her being in the job will be horrible results for the American people. But she's not unqualified. Marco Rubio is a sycophant. But I don't think, and I think he's a horrible choice to be Secretary of State, but I don't think he's unqualified for the job. So far, of the people that I've seen nominated, those two do have the qualifications for the job. And I hope you all don't think that I'm contradicting myself when I say this. Let me give you another example. And I said this with Dr. Horne. Robert Kennedy Jr. is unqualified to be the head of Health and Human Services. Unqualified. You need to have a background in public health. That's what this position, that's why the first H in HHS is what? Health. Don't bring me somebody without a degree in public health. In these days and times, there was a time when I don't think, for as important as it wasn't as important. But now, as we look at the disparity in health conditions, we look at the administration doing everything in its power to cut the social safety net, globalization, the ability to traverse the globe and all of the mixture of people that are coming to the country and on airplanes and all of the way that viruses now can transfer. You need someone with a solid grasp of public health. It's what do you call the head doctor, not the Surgeon General. Why would you appoint, and I'm not saying that Trump is doing this, but I'm just using this as an example. Why would you appoint or nominate someone to be the Attorney General that doesn't have a background in medicine? I'm the Surgeon General. I'm sorry, I said attorney. Surgeon General. Oh, and what I just said is true too. Why would you nominate someone to be Attorney General who at least doesn't have a law degree? It's about being qualified. So anyway, so I snag, practice what you preach. I don't know what the hell you're talking. I don't know what is that about? I don't know what that means. Trump is so far out of his league. Well, yes and no. It might depend on the league. Because obviously a number of people thought that he was in the league. It wasn't his league. So, you know, it depends on what your thoughts on what the league is. Because 77 million, over 77 million people voted for him, 2 million more that voted for Kamala Harris. And I'm not going to make this a discussion about Kamala Harris, but 77 million people, he won the popular vote and the Electoral College this time. So get back with me. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but what does that mean? 77 million Americans voted for this guy. Over 77 million. So what does that say about the league? If he's so far out of his league and over 77 million people voted for him, 2 million more than voted for Kamala, what does that say about the league? So Real Mama Fifi says, hello, Wilmer. Vote as a block in midterm elections. Okay. Vote for who? And I'm not, wait a minute. Is that Robert Brown, the smartest man in town? Is that the same Robert Brown I know? We need an international. See, with a point like we need an international united front, that to me sounds like Robert Brown, the smartest man in town. I'm gonna have to call him when they're done. If that's the same brother. So, okay, I like that. Vote as a block in the midterm elections. Real Mama Fifi, I got you. But who are you voting for in the midterms, and what are you voting for? Because as we sit here right now on the 24th of January, I haven't heard the Democrats say a mumbling thing about the midterms. I haven't heard them say anything about galvanizing or what the agenda is going to be. They should have been talking about this at the end of November. Okay, we got our butts kicked. We hear you. Here's now where we're headed. Here's what we're putting on the table. Here's what we want you all to do. I haven't heard it. So again, Real Mama Fifi, vote as a block. I got you. But vote for who and vote for what? And I think it could be really dangerous if we wind up once again making the mistake that we made in the presidential election 24, voting against something as opposed to voting for something. I say to Hakeem Jeffries, I'm not picking on the brother, never met the man, but he is the minority leader, so he is the one at the top of the food chain, so he is the one that I called out on the carpet all the time. We made the mistake in 24 with Kamala of trying to vote against something. Her major point was, I'm not him. He's a fool. I'm not him. Vote for me. That didn't work. And most political scientists that know anything about political science will tell you that in most instances, people don't vote against something, they vote for something. So give us something to vote for. Don't sit there and tell us the guy's a clown, the guy's a fool. He tells us that every day. So I wonder if that is Robert Brown, the fastest man in town. I mean, the smartest man in town. I'm going to have to see about that. Hakeem Jeffries threw his own uncle under the bus for the AIPAC money. Damn Skippy, he did. And Bakari Sellers, even though he's no longer in office, Bakari Sellers took the money. Hakeem Jeffries took the money. Kamala Harris took the money. And it wasn't even real serious money. It was, what they call that other kind of money. Funny money. It wasn't. You're right. He took the, in fact, what's the Lebanese dude? Older cat. The advocate. Golly, I'm so bad with names now. Ran for president in the Green Party a couple times. It'll come to me in a second. He put out a list of, because I was looking at it today, he put out a list of how much AIPAC money has gone into the coffers, into the hands of a lot of these black elected officials. And it's a hell of a lot of money. So you're right. He threw his uncle under the bus. Rubio is a towel boy. You're right. He is a towel boy. Dwight, you're right. And giving us dirty towels. He's a towel boy that's giving us dirty towels. Shag says, Robert Brown, you damn right. And I think that's Robert Brown, the smartest man in town. Most administrators in government are unqualified. The same person can go from Secretary of Defense to Secretary of Commerce and then Attorney General. Yeah, you're right. And I'm not saying you're saying this, but to that point, I would then add, so what does that mean? That we're, and again, I'm not implying, inferring, or saying that this is your point, but I'm asking, so does that mean that we're just supposed to sit back and accept unqualified people? And again, I'm not saying that's your point, but that your statement to me then brings the question, or in realizing what you're saying is absolutely right, should we demand better? See, because part of the big problem is we have abdicated our responsibility as citizens. We're not doing our job. We're not doing our job in holding these people accountable. So by our failing to do our job, we have now wound up with the garbage that we have. And so instead of coming home and finding garbage in your living room and getting a shovel and throwing it out, I guess you're walking around saying, well, you know, there's garbage in the living room. And it only, day after day, it only ferments and smells worse. Why pick Herschel Walker as ambassador to the Bahamas? What a slap in the face. Well, Robert, that's a slap in the face to the Bahamians. But here's what I think, Don. Here's what I think went on. And if I could get into Donald Trump's head for a minute, and that's a scary proposition and a hell of a frightening place to be because it's so dark in there. You can't even light a match. It's so dark in there. But I think Donald Trump said, I got to throw the Negroes something. I got to remember his blacks. Remember I love my blacks. So I think he decided he has to throw his blacks something. So he'll throw them someone who is basically irrelevant and put them in a position that is more ceremonial than it is substantive. I mean, I would love the opportunity to be the ambassador to the Bahamas. I would love to spend a hell of a lot of time in an American embassy in the Bahamas. I could get an awful lot done sitting on the beach drinking Mai Tai, even though I'm not a big Mai Tai drinker. But that's a good beach drink. I could get a hell of a lot done sitting on the beach with a telephone and a vodka and tonic. And I could get a whole lot of people to come see me. I could get a whole lot of people to come meet with me in the Bahamas. We could get a lot done on the golf course. We could get a lot done on the tennis court. We could get a lot of stuff done. But in terms of the broader scheme of geopolitics, and I'm not saying this in any way, shape, or form to diminish the Bahamas or insult Bahamians, but I don't think that the Bahamas are the center or focal point of the geopolitical landscape. So, hence Herschel Walker. I think that was throwing a bone to Donald Trump's blacks. And because look at Tim Scott. What did Tim Scott get? Tim Scott is like Charlie Brown during the Great Pumpkin, Halloween cartoon, when all the kids go trick-or-treating, and every time Charlie Brown comes to the door, he gets his thing in his bag, and they all go down they all go down a couple steps, and then and Lucy, what did you get? Oh, I got a candy bar. Linus, what did you get? Oh, I got a candy bar. Charlie Brown, what did you get? I got a rock. Tim Scott is like Charlie Brown. Someone told him that he stood a chance to be the VP, even though we all knew he stood no chance. But he thought, he even faked a wedding He even faked a wedding on a beach on one knee. And the woman, the expression on her face, like, what in the world? So, all right. Final thing, because it's getting to be that time. Prisons are new slave plantation, local, state, fed, and immigration. Well, prisons aren't new slave plantations. Prisons have been slave plantations for an incredibly long time. I wrote my dissertation on the prison industrial complex. And so I can tell you, with prison labor being what prison labor has been, with the assembly of medical equipment, call centers being run out of prisons. There are all kind of the furniture manufacturing. There are all kind of things that are being done in American prisons by American prisons for pennies on the dollar. And so prisons have been slave plantations. They are not new slave plantations. They've been slave plantations for a hell of a long time. I don't know what famous actor and singer and activist came from the Bahamas. I don't know. Sidney Poitier? Where was he from? Is he Bahamian? I don't know. Baron Trump did Nazi hand signals also. Okay, I didn't realize that. I thought just Elon Musk was that stupid. But if Barron did it and you're saying he did, I haven't seen the story on it. Well, that just shows you that the apple don't fall too far from the tree. I don't think you have to promise Tim Scott anything to do the Uncle Tom thing. Hey, let's do this. Let's stop insulting Uncle Tom. And I mean this in all sincerity. Because if you've ever read Uncle Tom's Cabin, Uncle Tom was not that guy. He was a strong black man who gave his life to protect others on the plantation. When Simon Legree was, I can't remember her name now, but when Simon Legree was looking to murder, I can't remember her name, Tom knew where she was and did not tell Simon Legree, did not snitch. And as a result of Tom not snitching, he was murdered. So if we could stop insulting Tom. See what happened, where this came from. It didn't come from the book. It didn't come from Uncle Tom's Cabin. That book was, and still may be, other than the Bible, the best-selling book since books have been printed. And it was an incredibly, incredibly popular book during its time. But when the book made it down south, because of racism, they couldn't have a strong black character in the South. And what they used to do for entertainment is they would have these traveling shows that would put on plays and whatnot as entertainment. So when those traveling shows got south, they had to change the nature of the character so that the show would be palatable to those racist white folks. And I have a book here. I have a book. I have a book here which lays all of this out. Now I can't put my hands on it, but on this side of my bookcase, I have a book that did the history, and I interviewed the guy that wrote the book that did the history of the making of Uncle Tom, the remaking of Uncle. That's not the title of the book, but that's the point. So if we could Read Uncle Tom's Cabin. And then if after reading that book, you believe that Tom was a Tom, so real Mama Fifi, yes, Uncle Tom was not the villain white history taught us. And it wasn't so much that he was a villain, it was that he was a lackey. Is that he was a spineless, scratching where you don't itch and laughing when it ain't funny Negro. And shuffling and buck dancing, and that's so it wasn't he was a villain, it was that he was a coon. And but he wasn't, not in the book. So read the book. It's a great book. Okay. Oh, Easy D, yes, you are correct, Uncle Tom. It was always Sambo who was the two-faced sellout traitor to blacks. Carol. And Carol, thank you so much for staying with me. And I hope you truly accepted my apology. I was trying to make a very strong point. And in trying to make a very strong point, I used very strong language. And I offended you, I disrespected you, and I apologize to you for having done that. So with that, folks, it's been a great week. And who wrote Moby Dick? Herman Melville. Try that one. I don't have a copy of Moby Dick on my bookcase, but try Herman Melville as the answer to the question of who wrote Moby Dick. We're still trying to get to 10,000 subscribers. And thank you all, hey, for staying with me. We had to switch the time because I've gone back to class and I'm teaching in the mornings from 8 to 11. So we couldn't do the, but so we switched now, and missing panel Fridays. Yeah, I do too. I miss Garland. I miss panel Fridays. And we might try to I saw Garland on Monday, by the way, and he's Garland. He's doing great. Beautiful dude. So yeah, you know what, we might let me work with my brilliant producer, who does not like for me to put her name out there. She's so humble, gorgeous and humble. But anyway, why did Eskimos never have to say thank you? I don't know. Where's the Joa Lati, where's the outrage towards Musk for his Nazi salute? I think Gerald Horne, Dr. Horne, mentioned this at the top of the show. That's a great question, because initially AIPAC gave him a pass on this. You see, it okay. I'll say this and then we'll wrap it up. Wow, so I've been on longer than I thought. But thank you all for staying with me. We need for y'all to click more likes, and we're trying to get to 10,000. But to who asked that question about Elon Musk? I just lost it. Joa Lati. If I'm butchering your name, I truly apologize. Where's the outrage? Okay. A lot of this sentiment is selective. So the outrage towards Elon Musk, okay, I think here's a great comparison. What if Minister Farrakhan did the same thing? And this is not a whataboutism. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to make a comparison to make a point. If Minister Farrakhan had done the Honorable Minister Farrakhan had done the same thing on the same day that Elon Musk did, what would be the response? Ask yourself that question. And if you come up with the same answer I'm coming up with, every Black person in the world would have a microphone in front of their face, and they'd be on MSNBC, they'd be on CNN, they'd be on Fox, they'd be on everything, getting every Black person to disavow their relationship, their favorable thought of Minister Farrakhan. That's what we'd be watching on television right now. There would be outrage. People's hair would be on fire. Literally, people's hair would be on fire. And every Black person of note, Juwan Howard, what do you think about what Minister Farrakhan said? Willie Mays, what do you think about what, I know he's passed, God bless Willie Mays. What do you think about what? Every Black person you know. Lil Wayne, what do you think about Snoop? Snoop, you're the king of the buzz. You're the king of the buzz. What do you think about Minister Farrakhan and what he did? Drunk man on the street, what do you think about Minister Farrakhan? Well, who's Minister Farrakhan? That doesn't matter. What do you think? Oh, it would have been Dave Chappelle. What do you think? They would have gotten everybody. Oprah. What do you think? Denzel. What do you think? Tim Scott. What do you think? Bakari Sellers. What do you think? Well, I don't know yet because AIPAC hasn't sent me my notes yet. Hakeem Jeffries. What do you think? Well, I'm not sure because AIPAC hasn't sent me my script yet. Let me check my phone. I'll get back to you in a minute. So I'll leave that one with that. Cherie, when we give spontaneously, our gifts are natural and free and greatly appreciated. So folks, again, we're trying to get to 10,000. We need you to really help us get to 10,000. And again, we do this for you, but we can't do this without you. And we're getting to a point where some serious decisions are going to have to be made. I'm doing everything humanly possible, but some decisions are going to have to be made because this is not free and this ain't cheap. So Zhu Yun says Farrakhan is a public figure and Elon Musk is a CEO and billionaire. Elon Musk is not a public figure. Standing next to Donald Trump on inaugural night, standing next to Donald Trump on the campaign trail, Elon Musk is not a public figure? I don't understand. That's what you call a distinction without a difference, in my humble opinion. No, Zhu Hyun, you're missing the point. Of course, whatever Farrakhan says will have a greater impact than something that a private citizen says. Minister Farrakhan is not a private citizen. When has the minister ever held elected office? He's not a private citizen. Come on, man, you're tripping. So, with that, wow, y'all hung with me. I greatly appreciate it. Greatly appreciate it. I got to thank Dr. Gerald Horne for joining me today. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned for new episodes every week. Folks, please, we're trying to get to 10,000. 10,000 helps to increase revenue. And I'm not trying to increase revenue to line my pockets. I'm trying to increase revenue so I can keep the show on the air. That's why the contributions matter. I'm not trying to pad my bank account. I'm trying to keep the show on the air, and keeping the show on the air costs money. So please follow and subscribe, leave a review, please share the show, follow on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all Monday. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Gerald Horne will be with me tomorrow on my Sirius XM show from 12 to 1 Eastern on 126. Laith Maruf is going to join me as well from 11 to 12 Eastern tomorrow. We don't chatter on Connecting the Dots. See y'all Monday. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great, blessed weekend. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.